In a rapidly changing neighborhood, a lost dog leads to an unexpected encounter with prejudice and the chance for connection. Sycamore Street used to be known for its friendly porches and neighborly waves, but lately, things feel different. Gentrification has arrived, bringing new faces, new houses, and new walls. When little Maya's dog, Pepper, slips his leash and disappears, her frantic search takes her door to door. At one of the newer homes, she encounters Mrs. Davison, a resident wary of outsiders, quick to judge based on appearances. Will Mrs. Davison help a desperate little girl find her lost dog? Or will suspicion and unspoken prejudices stand in the way? This is a story that unfolds on a street divided by change, by assumptions, and maybe by the color of skin. But it's also a story about hope and the unexpected bridges that can be built even in divided times. Before we see what unfolds on Sycamore Street, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? And if you're drawn to stories that make you think and feel, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. We're excited to share this journey with you. Let's begin. The afternoon sun was warm, painting long shadows from the freshly planted trees lining Sycamore Street. Maya skipped ahead of her mom, her little legs making quick work of the sidewalk. Pepper, her small, fluffy terrier mix, trotted happily beside her, his leash bouncing gently. Pepper's tail was a constant, joyful metronome, wagging to an inner rhythm only he could hear. Sycamore Street wasn't always this pretty. A few years ago it had looked a bit tired, a bit worn around the edges. But things had been changing. New shops were popping up, a trendy bakery with pastel-colored macarons in the window, an art gallery displaying modern sculptures. Houses that had once been rentals were being bought up, renovated, and painted in shades of gray and white that looked sharp and modern. Sycamore Street was being revitalized, some people said. Gentrified, others whispered. For Maya, it was just home. She lived with her mom in one of the older apartment buildings, the kind that hadn't been touched by the renovations. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. And most importantly, it was where Pepper was. Today was Saturday, Park Day. Maya and her mom, Sarah, usually walked to Elmwood Park, a big green space a few blocks over. It was Pepper's favorite place, filled with squirrels to chase, though he never caught any, and other dogs to sniff greetings from. As they walked, Maya hummed a little tune. Pepper, suddenly distracted by a particularly interesting scent wafting from a blooming rose bush in someone's front yard, tugged on his leash. Maya giggled and gently pulled him back. "Come on, Pepper," she said. Park time. They passed. A house with a perfectly manicured lawn and bright yellow front door. Then another, with a porch swing gently swaying in the breeze. These were the newer houses, the ones that seemed to stand a little taller and prouder than the older ones. Suddenly, a bright blue butterfly fluttered right in front of Pepper's nose. In a flash, Pepper lunged. The leash slipped from Maya's smaller hand. "Pepper, no!" Maya cried out, but it was too late. Pepper, leash trailing behind him, was off. He barked once, a joyous, playful bark, as he chased the butterfly, darting. Across the perfectly green lawns, Maya's heart leaped into her throat. "Pepper, come back! Pepper!" She started running, her little sneakers pounding on the sidewalk, calling his name again and again. Sarah, who had been a few steps behind, hurried after Maya. "Maya, wait! Be careful!" Maya ran, her eyes darting everywhere, trying to spot the flash of white fur and the flapping leash. She saw him weave through a couple of bushes, disappear behind a parked car. Then, nothing. "Pepper! Pepper!" Maya's voice started to tremble. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. Losing Pepper wasn't just losing a dog. Pepper was her best friend, her furry confidant, her shadow. He was always there, always happy to see her, always ready for a cuddle. Sarah caught up to Maya, breathless. Okay, let's calm down. We'll find him. Pepper doesn't go far, right? Maya nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. But, but what if he gets lost? What if he runs into the street? Her voice was thick with worry. We won't let that happen, Sarah said firmly, though she felt a knot of anxiety tightening in her own stomach. Let's start looking door to door. He probably just went into someone's yard. They started, back the way they came, retracing their steps. Maya called Pepper's name, her voice now a little hoarse. Sarah helped her call, her voice calm but carrying an edge of urgency. They tried the first few houses they passed. At one house, a friendly older woman with bright pink hair came to the door, listened to Maya's frantic explanation, and kindly checked her backyard. No Pepper. At the next, a young couple stepped out, joining the search for a few minutes, peering under bushes and calling Pepper's name. Still no sign. Hope began to dwindle with each passing house. Maya's steps slowed, her shoulders slumped. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What if we don't find him?" Sarah knelt down, pulling Maya into a hug. "We will find him, baby. We have to. Let's just try a few more houses, okay? Maybe he's just hiding somewhere quiet." They reached a house that looked different from the others. It was one of the newly renovated ones, with a dark gray exterior, large modern windows, and a neatly trimmed hedge bordering the yard. The gate to the front yard was closed, giving it a slightly secluded, almost uninviting feel. Sarah hesitated for a moment. This house felt different. The other houses they'd tried had a welcoming, neighborly vibe. This one felt closed off. "Come on," Sarah said, trying to sound positive. "Let's just check here too." Maya walked with her mom to the gate. Sarah reached out and gently pushed the gate open. They stepped into the front yard, which was immaculately landscaped. Smooth, gray stones surrounded perfectly shaped shrubs, not a single leaf out of place. Sarah knocked on the front door. They waited. A minute passed. No answer. Sarah knocked. Again, a little louder this time. Finally, they heard footsteps inside. The door opened slowly, and a woman stood in the doorway. She was white, maybe in her late 50s or early 60s, with neatly styled blonde hair and a crisp white blouse. She looked at Sarah and Maya, her expression neutral, almost guarded. "Yes?" she asked, her voice cool and polite, but not particularly welcoming. Sarah stepped forward slightly, trying to keep her voice light and friendly despite the knot of anxiety in her chest. "Excuse me, hello. We're so sorry to bother you. Our little dog, Pepper, he got off his leash a few minutes ago. We were wondering if maybe he'd wandered into your yard. He's small, white and fluffy with a black nose." The woman's eyes flicked down to Maya, then back to Sarah. She didn't immediately answer. She just stood there, looking at them, her expression unreadable. In that silence, Maya felt a little shiver of unease. It wasn't just that the woman wasn't immediately helping. It was something in her eyes, in the way she held herself, that made Maya feel small, unwelcome. Finally, the woman spoke. Her voice was still cool, still polite, but now with a distinct edge of suspicion. "A dog, you say? Off-leash?" Sarah nodded quickly. "Yes, we're so sorry. It was an accident. He chased a butterfly. We're just trying to find him. Could we just quickly check your yard? He might be hiding behind something." The woman hesitated again. She glanced over her shoulder as if checking to see if anyone else was watching. Then she looked back at Sarah and Maya, her eyes narrowed slightly. I don't know," she said slowly. "I'm not really a dog person. And, well, I'm just very particular about my garden. I just had it all redone." She gestured vaguely to the perfectly manicured yard around them. Sarah felt a flash of frustration. This wasn't about the garden. This was about something else. Something unspoken but hanging heavy in the air. She could feel it. A cold current running beneath the surface of the polite words. "Ma'am, please," Sarah pleaded, trying to keep her voice calm. "My daughter is really upset. He's just a little dog. We promise we'll be very careful. We just want to see if he's here." The woman's gaze lingered on Maya again, who was now clutching Sarah's hand tightly, her lower lip trembling. There was a flicker of something in the woman's eyes then. Something that might have been pity? Or maybe just calculation. "All right," the woman said finally, stepping back slightly and opening the door a little wider. "Fine, but just a quick look, and stay on the path, please." Her voice was sharp, as if doing them a huge favor. Sarah and Maya stepped into the yard, Sarah leading the way, Maya trailing close behind, her eyes wide and anxious. The woman watched them, standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, a watchful, almost hostile expression on her face. They scanned the yard quickly, behind the neatly trimmed hedges, under the decorative bushes, around the carefully placed garden ornaments. "Pepper! Pepper!" Maya called out softly, her voice thin with desperation. Nothing. The yard was pristine, perfect, and utterly pepperless. The silence hung heavy, broken only by Maya's quiet sniffles. Sarah straightened up, her shoulders slumping. We don't see him," she said to the woman, her voice flat. "Thank you for letting us look." The woman just nodded curtly, still standing in the doorway, still watching them. As Sarah and Maya turned to leave, a wave of despair washed over Maya. Tears finally spilled from her eyes and streamed down her cheeks. She felt utterly defeated. She wasn't just losing Pepper. It felt like she was also being pushed away, like she didn't belong on this perfectly manicured street, in this neighborhood of new houses and closed gates. They reached the gate, Sarah's arm around Maya's shoulders. As they were about to step back onto the sidewalk, a faint whimper reached their ears. It was a small sound, almost lost in the quiet afternoon, but Maya heard it. She froze. "Mommy, wait," she whispered, pulling back slightly. "Did you hear that?" Sarah stopped and listened. For a moment there was nothing. Then a tiny whimper again, softer this time, like a puppy's. "Cry." "Yes," Sarah said, her voice filled with a sudden surge of hope. "I hear something." They both turned back towards the house, their eyes scanning the yard again, more intently this time. Where was that sound coming from? They walked slowly, cautiously back into the yard, ignoring the path this time, their focus completely on finding the source of the faint whimpering. They moved towards the porch, a small covered area at the front of the house, shaded and slightly hidden from the street view. As they got closer, the whimpering grew a little louder, and then they saw him, Pepper. He was huddled in a corner of the porch, behind a large potted fern, curled into a tiny white ball, trembling slightly. His leash was tangled around the base of the fern pot. He looked up at Maya and Sarah with wide, scared eyes. "Pepper!" Maya cried out, her voice filled with pure, unadulterated joy. She ran to him, dropping to her knees and throwing her arms around him. "Pepper! Oh, Pepper! You're here! You're okay!" Pepper started wagging, his tail furiously licking Maya's face, whining and wriggling with relief and happiness. Maya buried her face in his soft fur, her tears now tears of pure, overwhelming joy. Sarah stood back for a moment, watching Maya and Pepper, feeling a wave of relief wash over her so powerful it almost made her weak in the knees. He was safe. They had found him. Then she remembered the woman, still standing in the doorway watching. Sarah looked up at her, expecting, what? A smile? Relief too? But the woman's expression was different now. It wasn't cold anymore. It was something softer, almost sheepish, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit ashamed. The woman stepped forward slowly, hesitantly. She walked onto the porch and stood a few feet away from Maya and Pepper, her arms now hanging loosely at her sides. "Well," she said quietly, her voice now almost gentle. "There he is." Maya, still hugging Pepper tightly, looked up at the woman, her eyes wide and wet. Sarah stood up, holding Pepper's leash, which Maya had gratefully handed over. She looked at the woman, searching her face, trying to understand the shift in her demeanor. He must have squeezed under the gate somehow, Sarah said softly, filling the awkward silence. He's a bit of an escape artist. The woman nodded slowly, still looking at Pepper, who was now happily licking Maya's hand. He's very quiet, she said, almost to herself. I didn't even realize he was there. Sarah took a step closer to the woman, a tentative step. Thank you, she said sincerely. Thank you for letting us look. And thank you for not chasing him away or anything. The woman finally met Sarah's gaze, and for the first time Sarah saw a flicker of genuine emotion in her eyes. It was a fleeting expression, but it was there. Something that looked almost like regret. The woman began, then paused, as if searching for the right words. I apologize, she said finally, her voice low. I wasn't very welcoming, was I? She shook her head slightly, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of self-reproach. It's just, this neighborhood, it's changed so much, so quickly. And not always for the better, you know? Her voice trailed off, her gaze drifting down to the ground. Sarah nodded slowly. She understood. She knew about the changes, about the gentrification, about the subtle tensions that sometimes simmered beneath the surface of Sycamore Street. She had felt it herself sometimes, that sense of being an outsider, of not quite belonging in this newly polished, increasingly expensive world. It can be unsettling, Sarah said gently. Change can be hard. The woman looked up at Sarah again, her eyes searching. Yes, she said softly. Yes, it is. She took a deep breath. My name is Mrs. Davison, she said, extending her hand tentatively toward Sarah. Martha Davison. Sarah smiled slightly and took her hand. Sarah Carter. She replied, shaking Mrs. Davison's hand. And this is my daughter, Maya, and of course, Pepper. She gestured to Maya and the still wriggling dog. Mrs. Davison's gaze softened as she looked at Maya again. Hello, Maya, she said, her voice surprisingly warm. I'm glad you found your dog. Maya, her shyness melting away in the relief and warmth of the moment, smiled back at Mrs. Davison. Thank you, she said simply. He's my best friend. Mrs. Davison nodded, a small smile touching the corners of her lips. I can see that. For a moment they just stood there, the three of them, Sarah, Maya, and Mrs. Davison, in the perfectly manicured front yard, Pepper safely between them, the afternoon sun casting long, lengthening shadows. The tension that had been so thick in the air just moments before had dissipated, replaced by something lighter, something almost hopeful. It wasn't a perfect ending. Mrs. Davison's initial suspicion and unwelcoming demeanor couldn't be completely erased, and the underlying tensions of a changing neighborhood wouldn't magically disappear. But in that moment, a small bridge had been built. A fragile connection forged between two women from different worlds, brought together by a lost dog and a little girl's unwavering love for her furry friend. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start with. Maybe it was a reminder that even in divided streets, unexpected moments of understanding and connection were still possible. That even behind closed gates and perfectly manicured lawns, there was still room for kindness, empathy, and a little bit of shared humanity. We hope you enjoyed this story of Lost Dog, Divided Street. What did you think? Did this story resonate with you? Let us know in the comments below. And if you appreciate stories that explore real life and the unexpected connections we can make, please give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more content like this. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful day.